What if I told you that forgiveness, the very gift that once kept the empath alive, can also be the weapon that keeps them chained? And what happens when the empath finally stops forgiving? Let me ask you this. How many times have you said, "It's okay, I understand," only to watch the same betrayal repeat itself? How many times has your compassion been twisted into a leash? Here's the shocking truth: when the empath stops forgiving, every false mask begins to crack. And the people who built their lives on deception can no longer breathe in your presence. But here's the part nobody talks about: forgiveness is not always healing. Sometimes forgiveness is the cage, because each time the empath forgives without accountability, they feed the illusion. They protect the narcissist's mask. They preserve the persona Carl Jung warned us about, the false self built to hide the shadow. And the moment the empath says, "No more," the mask shatters. Let's break this down. Jung believed the persona is the mask we show the world, the polished image that hides the raw, unrefined parts of our psyche. For most people, the persona is a survival tool. But for narcissists, it becomes their identity. They wear it so tightly, so consistently, that they begin to confuse it with their true self. Yet this mask can only survive under one condition: that others continue to believe in it. And do you know who believes most deeply? The empath. The empath, with their boundless compassion, becomes the protector of the narcissist's mask. Every time they forgive, every time they excuse, every time they soften the blow, they patch the cracks in the narcissist's fragile facade. But when the empath awakens, when they stop forgiving automatically, they stop patching. They stop covering. They stop enabling. And without that protection, the mask begins to crumble. Wait until you hear this, because this is the part that terrifies the narcissist more than anything else. Imagine a stage actor whose costume begins to rip mid-performance. As long as someone rushes to the stage to mend it, the illusion continues. But the moment no one helps, the audience sees the truth. The actor is exposed. That is exactly what happens when the empath stops forgiving. The narcissist's mask rips open for all to see. Let me share a story to make this real. There was once a man named Jonah, deeply empathic, gentle, always ready to understand. He was in a relationship with a woman who constantly belittled him, blamed him, and betrayed his trust. Every time she hurt him, she would apologize, sometimes with tears, sometimes with charm. And Jonah, loyal to his nature, would forgive. He believed forgiveness meant love. He believed compassion meant endurance. But one day, something shifted. After yet another betrayal, she said, "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." And for the first time, Jonah didn't say, "It's okay," he said, "I don't believe you anymore." Those 6 words shattered the cycle. In that moment, her mask cracked. Because Jonah's forgiveness was the glue that held it together. Without it, the illusion broke. But here's the truth most people miss for the empath. This moment is terrifying. Forgiveness feels safe. It feels spiritual. It feels noble. Stopping feels like betrayal of their own nature. Yet Jung would argue the opposite. He would say that unconditional forgiveness without consciousness is not virtue, it's shadow denial. It is the refusal to confront darkness, both in the narcissist and in the self. And by refusing to forgive without accountability, the empath finally confronts shadow head-on. But wait, this next truth will shock you. The empath's refusal to forgive is not about vengeance. It's about truth. It's about saying, "I see who you are behind the mask, and I will not pretend anymore." This refusal is not the end of compassion, it's the beginning of authenticity. Think of it like this. Forgiveness is like watering a garden. If you water flowers, they bloom. But if you water weeds endlessly, they choke out the flowers. The empath, in their innocence, believes every plant deserves water. But when they awaken, they realize not every seed is meant to be nurtured. Some seeds are poison. Some masks are prisons. And sometimes withholding water is the only way for the true garden to grow, Carl Jung said. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. For the empath, the pain of withholding forgiveness is the doorway to consciousness. They realize that forgiveness without transformation is nothing but complicity. They realize that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. And they realize that their silence, their refusal to participate in the illusion, is the very act that forces the mask to collapse. But here's the part nobody tells you: when the empath stops forgiving, the narcissist doesn't just lose control. They lose their entire identity. Because remember, the narcissist's mask only exists as long as others agree to see it as real. When the empath withdraws their agreement, when they no longer soothe or excuse, the narcissist is forced to face what they've hidden all along: emptiness, insecurity, shadow. And that confrontation is unbearable. So let me ask you again, what happens when forgiveness ends? The answer is this: the game ends. The mask shatters. The truth bleeds through. And in that truth, both the empath and the narcissist are forever changed. But wait, this story is only beginning. Because the empath's refusal to forgive is not the end of their journey. It is the beginning of power. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into what happens when the empath claims that power and how the narcissist reacts when their greatest weapon, the empath's compassion, no longer obeys their control. Let me ask you something. How many times have you forgiven someone? Not because they truly changed, but because you didn't want to feel the weight of conflict? How many times did you say, "It's fine, I forgive you," while your soul whispered, "But it's not fine"? This is the moment where the empath's deepest struggle lives. Because forgiveness feels like love, but sometimes it is nothing more than self-betrayal. But here's the part nobody talks about: when the empath begins to step back, when they pause and say, "Not this time," it creates a ripple that shakes the entire dynamic. The narcissist, who has built their power on predictable cycles of hurt and forgiveness, suddenly loses their rhythm. It's like a musician trying to play without a beat. Chaos begins to creep in. Carl Jung believed that life constantly pushes us to confront what we refuse to face. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the empath, automatic forgiveness is unconscious. It's a habit, a reflex, a survival tool. They confuse compassion with surrender, peace with silence. But when they finally make the unconscious conscious, when they realize they've been forgiving not out of love but out of fear, that's when everything changes. Wait until you hear this. Because this is the exact point where the narcissist's mask begins to tremble. The narcissist expects the cycle: wound, apologize, forgive, reset. It's a script they've perfected. But when the empath interrupts the cycle, when forgiveness doesn't come, the narcissist suddenly feels naked. Their mask, once reinforced by the empath's grace, begins to slip. And here's the shocking truth: the narcissist cannot survive without that forgiveness. Because it is not just absolution, it is validation. It tells them, your mask still works. Let me give you a story. There was a young woman named Clara, deeply empathic and endlessly forgiving. Her friend Melissa often used her kindness, borrowing money without paying back, canceling plans last minute, gossiping behind her back. And every time Melissa apologized, Clara would say, "It's okay, I forgive you." But one day, Clara realized that forgiveness had become meaningless. It wasn't healing anyone. It was simply erasing accountability. So the next time Melissa apologized, Clara responded with silence. Not angry silence, just a calm, steady pause. And then she said, "I'm not ready to forgive you." Those 7 words hit harder than any accusation. Because for the first time, Clara broke the script. And Melissa's mask, her charm, her false remorse, shattered under the weight of reality. But here's the part nobody tells you: when the empath withholds forgiveness, the narcissist doesn't just feel anger. They feel fear. Because in that moment, they realize they no longer control the narrative. The power balance shifts, and suddenly, the empath becomes the mirror the narcissist has been running from. Jung would call this a confrontation with the shadow. The empath, by setting boundaries, forces the narcissist to see the darkness they've projected outward. And the narcissist will do almost anything to avoid this. They might escalate using rage, manipulation, or guilt. They might charm, suddenly turning sweet, apologetic, even vulnerable. They might even smear the empath, painting them as cold, unforgiving, heartless. Why? Because the empath has done the one thing the narcissist cannot tolerate. They stopped enabling the mask, but wait, this next truth will shock you. The empath doesn't have to fight, argue, or explain. Their power is not in aggression, but in stillness, in the refusal to play. Imagine a chess game where one player refuses to move their pieces, not out of defeat, but out of recognition that the game itself is rigged. The narcissist, addicted to strategy, suddenly finds themselves powerless. Because without forgiveness, without compliance, there is no game. Here's the paradox. The empath always thought forgiveness made them strong. They thought compassion meant endurance. But Jung would argue otherwise. He believed that true strength comes not from denying the shadow, but from integrating it. That means acknowledging anger, setting boundaries, saying no. It means realizing that forgiveness without accountability is not light. It is shadow disguised as virtue. Think of it like this. Imagine you're holding a broken vase. Someone knocks it over again and again, and every time you carefully glue it back together. At first this feels noble, but over time the vase becomes nothing but cracks and glue. The act of forgiveness hasn't saved it, it has destroyed it. Sometimes, the most compassionate choice is to put the vase down and say, no more. But here's the part nobody talks about when the empath does this. They begin to see themselves differently. They no longer define their worth by how much pain they can absorb. They begin to see compassion not as endless tolerance, but as conscious choice. They realize, I am not obligated to forgive someone who wears a mask and refuses to grow, and this realization is liberation. Because once the empath stops forgiving automatically, they step out of the role of caretaker and into the role of truth teller. And truth is the one force the narcissist cannot manipulate. Let me ask you again, what happens when the empath stops forgiving? The answer is not just that the narcissist loses control. The empath gains themselves. They reclaim their voice, their presence, their identity, and that reclamation is more powerful than any false peace forgiveness ever created. But wait, we're only scratching the surface. Because in the next part, we'll explore what happens when the empath's new boundaries force the narcissist into full exposure, when every false mask shatters and the raw, unfiltered truth finally comes to light. And trust me, that's the moment that changes everything. Here's a question that might haunt you. What happens when a person who has always lived behind a mask suddenly feels that mask slipping? The answer is simple: panic. And when the empath stops forgiving, when they interrupt the script, the narcissist's panic begins to spill out in unmistakable ways. But here's the part. Nobody talks about the mask doesn't fall off all at once. It cracks, it shifts, it slides, and with each slip, the narcissist scrambles to put it back in place. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with charm, sometimes with guilt. Each reaction is nothing more than desperation disguised as control. Carl Jung warned us about this when he spoke of the persona, the social mask each of us wears to adapt to the world. For most people, the persona is flexible. But for the narcissist, it becomes their entire identity. Without it, they are hollow. Jung called this inflation of the persona a dangerous state where the mask consumes the self. So when the empath refuses forgiveness, it's not just rejection. It is an existential threat. Wait until you hear this, because the first mask to break is always the mask of remorse. The narcissist will often pretend to be sorry, to show false guilt, because they know empaths are wired to respond to vulnerability. They'll cry, they'll confess, they'll say, I'll change this time, I promise. But when the empath doesn't accept it, the performance falters. The crocodile tears dry up, the hollow words collapse. And suddenly you see the shift, the remorse vanishes, and rage emerges. It's like watching a stage actor forget their lines mid-performance. For a moment, the audience glimpses the unpolished, unmasked human beneath, and it's terrifying because what you see is not remorse, but raw entitlement. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Daniel who had always forgiven his partner, Ava. Each betrayal, each manipulation, he smoothed over with compassion. But the day came when he stopped. He told her, I can't keep forgiving what you won't stop doing. At first, Ava wept. She begged. She promised 1,000 times that she would change. But when Daniel remained still, when forgiveness didn't come, her tears turned to fury. "You're cruel," she spat. "You're abandoning me. You never really loved me. Do you see the shift?" That's the mask collapsing. Remorse gave way to rage because the mask no longer worked. But here's the shocking truth: rage is not the narcissist's final weapon. It's only the first. When rage fails, they often turn to projection. They will accuse the empath of the very sins they themselves commit. "You're selfish. You're manipulative. You're heartless." Why? Because if they can't control how you see them, they'll try to control how you see yourself. Jung explained projection as the psyche's way of disowning its shadow. The narcissist cannot face their flaws, so they project them onto others. And the empath, who feels deeply and doubts themselves often, becomes the perfect target. This is the dangerous moment the empath begins to question: am I the problem? Am I too harsh? Should I forgive after all? But wait, this next truth will shock you. The moment the empath reopens the door of forgiveness without accountability, the mask resets. The narcissist regains control. And the cycle begins again, stronger than before. That's why Jung insisted that healing is never found in denial. It is only found in truth. So what happens when the empath holds the line, when they refuse to be pulled back into the loop? That's when the narcissist's final mask comes out, the mask of false vulnerability. They may share old wounds, past traumas, or broken memories to appeal to the empath's compassion. And while these wounds may be real, they are not shared for healing. They are shared for manipulation. Imagine a drowning person. Not trying to swim, but trying to pull you under so you can drown with them. That's what this false vulnerability feels like. The empath senses the pain, but also realizes they are not being asked to help heal. They are being asked to rescue someone who refuses to leave the water. But here's the part nobody talks about: when the empath sees through this final mask, they awaken to their own power. They realize forgiveness is not about keeping the peace, it's about protecting their soul. And for the first time, the narcissist stands exposed without a mask, facing the very shadow they've been running from. Jung believed that every collapse of the persona is an invitation. For ordinary people, it's an invitation to grow. But for the narcissist, it feels like annihilation. They don't want to integrate their shadow. They want to bury it. So, when the empath refuses forgiveness, the narcissist faces their greatest fear: being seen as they truly are. Let me reframe this with a metaphor. Imagine a grand theater where an actor has been performing the same role for years. The costume is perfect, the lighting flawless, the applause endless. But one night, the spotlight shifts and the audience sees behind the curtain. They see the sweat, the exhaustion, the cracks in the paint. And in that moment, the actor realizes the show is over. That's what happens when the empath refuses to play along. But wait, this next truth may shake you. Not every empath is ready for this moment. Because when the mask shatters, what lies beneath is raw, chaotic, and often cruel. The narcissist may lash out, escalate, or attempt to destroy the empath's reputation. That's why the empath must not only stop forgiving blindly, but also strengthen their boundaries, ground themselves in truth, and prepare for backlash. Because the shattering of masks is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of exposure. So let me ask you, what happens after the mask falls? What does the empath see when the illusion dissolves and the truth stands naked before them? In the next part, we'll go deeper into the anatomy of this collapse. We'll uncover the hidden strategies narcissists use to rebuild their masks, and the secret strength empaths discover in refusing to play the game. Trust me, this is where the story gets even darker and even more liberating. Have you ever noticed how quickly someone who's been exposed tries to rewrite the story? That's the narcissist's survival instinct. Once their mask shatters, they don't sit quietly in defeat. They scramble to rebuild brick by brick, lie by lie, charm by charm. And here's the shocking truth: they don't rebuild the mask for themselves. They rebuild it for you, the empath. Because without your belief, their illusion cannot survive. But here's the part nobody talks about: the reconstruction is often more dangerous than the original mask. Why? because it's crafted with the knowledge of what broke it in the first place. The narcissist learns from the collapse. They study your boundaries, your silence, your refusal to forgive, and then they shape a new mask designed to bypass your defenses. Carl Jung warned that when a person identifies too much with their persona, they lose access to their authentic self. They become a hollow shell trying to impress others rather than grow. For the narcissist, this identification is absolute. So when the old mask falls, they don't look inward for truth. They look outward for a new disguise. Wait until you hear this, because the first tool of reconstruction is not apology, not anger, but confusion. The narcissist will twist timelines, deny events, or suddenly rewrite the narrative of what really happened. They'll say things like, "That's not what I meant," or "You're remembering wrong," or "You always exaggerate." This gaslighting is not just about denial, it's about destabilization. If they can make you question your memory, they can make you doubt your decision to stop forgiving. And here lies the empath's greatest temptation, the pull to explain, to clarify, to prove themselves. But the moment the empath steps into that arena, the trap is set. Because the narcissist doesn't seek truth. They seek reaction. And your reaction feeds the reconstruction. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a glass mask that has shattered into pieces. The narcissist, desperate, begins gluing it back together, but they're not using real adhesive. They're using your emotions as the glue. Each explanation you give, each argument you enter, each attempt to clarify the truth, it's another drop of glue helping them rebuild. And before you realize it, the mask looks whole again. But wait, this next truth will shock you. The empath's greatest weapon in this moment is not forgiveness, not explanation, but silence. Because silence starves the reconstruction. Detachment deprives the narcissist of the energy they need to rebuild, Jung once said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The narcissist avoids this truth by projecting their unconscious onto you. But when you refuse to play along, when you stop feeding their illusion, you force them into confrontation with their own shadow. That's why your silence terrifies them. But here's the part nobody talks about after confusion fails. The narcissist escalates to imitation. They'll mimic growth, mimic awareness, mimic healing. They'll use therapy language, spiritual language, or even psychological insights to convince you they've changed. They may say, "I've been reflecting on my shadow," or "I understand now how my trauma made me act this way." And while these words sound profound, pay attention to the pattern. Real growth is slow, humble, consistent. But the narcissist's imitation is instant, dramatic, and often rehearsed. It's not about healing. It's about winning you back. Let me share another story. Sophia, an empathic woman, finally walked away from her narcissistic partner. Mark, she stopped forgiving, stopped explaining, and refused to play the game. Weeks later, Mark returned not with rage, but with poetry. He spoke of childhood wounds, quoted psychology books, even shared journal entries about his supposed inner work. For a moment, Sophia was tempted to believe him. But then she noticed something. The words were beautiful, but the actions never changed. His mask had been rebuilt, but behind it, the same shadows remained. And that's the dangerous beauty of the reconstruction trap. The new mask looks wiser, softer, even enlightened. But beneath it, the old patterns still wait. But wait, this next part is critical. The empath who has stopped forgiving must also stop rescuing. Because sometimes it's not the mask that draws the empath back in, it's the story. The empath hears the wounds, the pain, the trauma, and feels the urge to heal. But Jung warned us that rescuing another from their shadow is impossible. Each person must integrate their own darkness. And when the empath takes on that task, they are not helping, they are sacrificing themselves. So what does true strength look like in this stage? It looks like boundaries. It looks like silence. It looks like detachment that says, "I see your mask. I hear your words. But I will not hand you the glue to put it back together." Let me give you a metaphor. The narcissist is like a magician whose trick has been exposed. At first they panic, but then they rush to invent a new trick. The audience, your belief is what gives them power. But once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've understood the illusion, No matter how dazzling the new trick appears, it no longer has the same hold on you. That's what it means for the empath to stop forgiving blindly. The magic dies, not because the trick changes, but because you no longer participate in the illusion. But here's the part nobody talks about: when you stop participating, the narcissist faces the one thing they've always feared: themselves. No mask, no applause, no illusion. Just the raw shadow, unfiltered and unaccepted. And while that may not transform them, it liberates you. So let me ask you, if the narcissist cannot rebuild their mask, if their tricks no longer work, what happens next? What does exposure look like when the illusion finally dies? Here's the question you've been waiting for: what does the narcissist do when all masks fail? When forgiveness is gone and when the empath no longer bends? The answer is chilling. They don't simply retreat. They attack. But wait until you hear this, because the attack isn't always physical or obvious. Often it's psychological, social, and invisible to those who don't know what to look for. And yet, to the empath, it's unmistakable. This stage is where smear campaigns begin, triangulation takes form, and silent sabotage lurks in the background. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For the narcissist, however, irritation doesn't lead to understanding, it leads to projection. And when the empath refuses to forgive, that projection explodes outward. The narcissist cannot sit with their shadow, so they paint it onto the empath for the whole world to see. Let's start with the smear campaign. This is the narcissist's attempt to rewrite the story of who you are. They will whisper lies, exaggerate truths, and twist events so that others begin to question you. They might tell mutual friends that you are unstable, vindictive, or cruel. They may even adopt the language of victimhood, painting themselves as the one who endured your abuse. But here's the part nobody talks about: the smear campaign is not about truth. It's about control. By shaping the narrative, the narcissist hopes to isolate you, discredit you, and lure others into their web. It's not enough that you stopped forgiving. They want to make sure no one else does either. And then comes triangulation. If the smear campaign is about the crowd, triangulation is about the stage play with three actors. The narcissist introduces a third person, maybe a friend, a family member, or even a new partner, and uses them as a pawn. Suddenly, you hear about how this third person understands them better, treats them with more kindness, or sees how unfair you've been. Triangulation is a psychological weapon designed to trigger insecurity in the empath. It says, "You've been replaced. You're not special anymore. You've lost your place." But here's the shocking truth. The purpose isn't love or connection with the third party. It's punishment. It's a twisted way of saying, you will regret stopping your forgiveness. But wait, this next truth may shake you. The most dangerous move of all is silent sabotage. This is when the narcissist doesn't argue, doesn't rage, doesn't beg. Instead, they work quietly behind the scenes, pulling strings in ways you don't notice until much later. Maybe a job opportunity suddenly disappears. Maybe your reputation suffers in subtle whispers. Maybe a friend grows cold for reasons you can't quite understand. That's silent sabotage, the invisible hand of resentment trying to dismantle your life. And yet, even here, there is a hidden revelation, because when the narcissist engages in smear campaigns, triangulation, and sabotage, they reveal their greatest fear: exposure. If they truly didn't care, they wouldn't fight so hard to control the narrative. Their desperate need to manage how others see them is proof that the mask is all they have. Jung explained this perfectly in his writings on the shadow. He said that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. The narcissist's smear campaign is nothing but projection amplified. Their words about you are often confessions about themselves. If they call you manipulative, it is because they manipulate. If they call you cold, it is because they are frozen inside. If they call you cruel, it is because they know cruelty in their own reflection. But here's the part nobody talks about: the empath, once awakened, can transform this chaos into clarity. Think of it like standing in a storm. The narcissist throws thunder, lightning, and rain in every direction. But instead of drowning in it, the empath begins to notice patterns. Each accusation reveals a hidden truth. Each lie exposes a deeper wound. The smear campaign becomes a mirror not of the empath's flaws, but of the narcissist's shadow. Let me share a story. When Maya stopped forgiving her narcissistic partner, he began spreading rumors that she was unstable and controlling. At first, she was devastated. She tried to defend herself, explain the truth, convince others. But then she realized every word he spoke about her was exactly what she had endured from him. His lies were confessions in disguise. Suddenly, she no longer felt the urge to fight his narrative. She saw it for what it was, a shadow made visible, and that's the empath's turning point. When you stop reacting to the smear, when you no longer chase validation, when you see projection for what it is, you step into clarity. The smear loses its sting. The triangulation loses its grip. The sabotage loses its power. Because here's the shocking truth: the narcissist's attacks only work when you still crave their approval, or the approval of those under their spell. Once you detach, the storm becomes nothing more than noise. But wait, this next truth will surprise you. The empath who survives this stage doesn't just walk away with scars. They walk away with sight. They learn to see beyond masks, beyond words, beyond illusions. They become fluent in the language of shadows. And that, ironically, is what terrifies the narcissist the most, because an empath who no longer forgives blindly, who no longer fears being misunderstood, who no longer chases after false peace, that empath is untouchable. They are no longer an easy target. They are no longer supply. They are a mirror that refuses to reflect the narcissist's illusion. So let me ask you, what happens when the empath becomes untouchable? When they rise above the smear, the triangulation, the sabotage? What does the narcissist do when their every weapon falls useless to the ground? Here's a haunting question to open your mind: what happens to someone when every mask they've ever worn shatters, and there is nothing left to hide behind? The answer is unsettling. For the narcissist, this is not just humiliation, it is a collapse into the very emptiness they've been running from their entire life. But here's the part nobody talks about: beneath the grand persona, beneath the charm, beneath the illusions, lies nothing but a void. And when the empath stops forgiving, when the projections no longer stick, when the smear campaigns fall flat, that void is all that remains. Carl Jung warned of this when he spoke about the danger of over-identifying with the persona. The persona, he said, is like a mask we wear in society. But if we mistake the mask for our true self, we risk becoming hollow. For the narcissist, that mistake is complete. Their identity is nothing but a persona layer upon layer of masks. So when those masks break, they are left staring into an abyss. Wait until you hear this, because the abyss doesn't just swallow them. It consumes their relationships too. Once the empath refuses forgiveness, others begin to notice the cracks as well. The charm no longer dazzles the way it used to. The stories no longer hold weight. Even those who once believed the illusions start to sense something is off. And this is where the narcissist begins to spiral. They're not just losing you, they're losing the audience. And without an audience, a performer is nothing. This descent is marked by desperation. Some narcissists will escalate, trying harder than ever to control, manipulate, or regain the spotlight. Others will collapse inward, slipping into depression, emptiness, even nihilism. Because here's the shocking truth: the narcissist's greatest fear is not losing love. It is losing the mask. Without it, they feel like nothing. But here's the part nobody talks about: the empath's journey in this moment is the exact opposite. While the narcissist collapses into emptiness, the empath rises into authenticity. Let me explain. When the empath stops forgiving blindly, they step into a deeper truth that forgiveness is not the same as healing. Forgiveness without accountability is not compassion, it's self-abandonment. And when the empath ends this cycle, they begin to reclaim the parts of themselves they lost. It's like digging up buried treasure. Every time they said yes when they wanted to say no, a piece of their authenticity was buried. Every time they forgave without change, another piece was hidden away. But now, as they stop forgiving, they start uncovering those lost parts. Their voice, their boundaries, their clarity, Their strength. Jung would call this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, light and shadow alike. For the empath, individuation begins the moment they stop carrying someone else's shadow. But wait, this next truth will shock you. The empath's rise is not quiet. It radiates. Once they reclaim their authenticity, others begin to notice. Their energy shifts. Their presence feels grounded. Their boundaries no longer come from fear, but from truth. And ironically, this growth exposes the narcissist even more. Because the contrast becomes undeniable, the empath grows, while the narcissist crumbles. Let me share a story. After years of forgiving her manipulative friend, Alina finally stopped. She no longer explained herself. She no longer bent to guilt. She no longer played the rescuer. At first, her friend attacked, spreading rumors and trying to isolate her. But Alina held her ground. Weeks later, something remarkable happened. Others began to notice the difference. Alina looked freer, lighter, more alive. Meanwhile, her friend seemed bitter, frantic, and unstable. The truth was visible without Alina ever having to prove it, and that's the paradox. The empath's silence speaks louder than the narcissist's smear. The empath's growth reveals more than the narcissist's lies, but wait, this next part is critical. The empath's rise is not just personal. It's spiritual. When they stop forgiving without change, they align with a higher law of balance. They recognize that compassion without truth is imbalance, that love without boundaries is chaos. They begin to embody what Jung might describe as the archetype of the self, the union of strength and gentleness, of shadow and light. And here's the shocking truth: the narcissist, who once felt like a giant in their world, begins to look small in comparison. Not because the empath sought revenge, but because the empath chose authenticity. Think of it like this. Imagine two trees in a forest. One has always grown tall but hollow, its trunk empty, its branches reaching only for show. The other has grown slowly, roots deep, branches steady. At first, the hollow tree looks impressive. But when the storm comes, the hollow one cracks and falls, while the rooted one stands tall. That's the difference between the narcissist's persona and the empath's authenticity. But here's the part nobody talks about: the empath, by refusing to forgive blindly, doesn't just free themselves. They set a ripple into motion. Others watching begin to wake up. They start to see the cracks in their own lives, the masks around them, the places where they too have abandoned their truth. The empath's decision becomes an act of silent rebellion, a light that reveals the shadows in every corner. And that's why the narcissist fights so hard against this moment, because your authenticity doesn't just liberate you, it exposes them. So let me ask you, what happens when the empath fully embraces this authenticity? When they stop explaining, stop defending, and simply live as their true self? And more importantly, what does the narcissist do when their emptiness is no longer hidden, when their illusions collapse entirely?